School tells middle schoolers that they can get abortions without ever talking to their parents. The information came from the ghouls at Planned Parenthood, where babies mutilating babies is a business plan, not a hate crime. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show. As you know, we're the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today's show is sponsored by Mike Lindell and our friends at MyPillow. For more than 15 years, MyPillow has been producing the most comfortable pillows in the world. But did you all know that they sell Egyptian cotton sheets, premium sheets? These ultra-soft, extremely durable sheets come in a range of colors and sizes. Right now, our audience, our Dr. Duke Show audience, can get 2 sets of Giza sheets for the price of 1. That's what they call BOGO on the streets today. And you'll get free shipping as well. Simply use the code Dr. Duke, that's DRDUKE. And if you go to MyPillow, you will also get up to 66% on other items, including pillows, towels, blankets, and dog beds even. Again, use the access code Dr. Duke, that's DRDUKE, to save up to 66%. Today we start in Tacoma, Washington, where a teacher recently handed out a flyer to middle school kids. In case you didn't know, those are little kids, reminding them that they don't need to notify their parents if they want to get tested for STDs, HIV, or even get an abortion. So there you have it. Middle schoolers as young as 10, 9, 11. Now they know that if they need an abortion, they can contact their teacher, and mommy and daddy never have to know. And that's a nice service that you can get on your middle school campus if you didn't know.
So in Tacoma, Washington, I got to give a shout out to Jason Rantz, of the Jason Rantz Show, who's been basically highlighting a lot of things that have been happening, especially with Seattle, but all across Washington State, and the insanity happening in the schools. And so this science teacher, who apparently is a new teacher, so is that an excuse, I guess, handed out a flyer to middle school students saying that they can get abortions, birth control, and age, no parents' consent. You can see it there. And we're about to show Jason Rand speaking on it, but he says, yes, it's factually accurate in terms of, they didn't break the laws for what they reported, but why would you have done this in the first place? Well, before we go to the clip, I think an important point needs to be made here. We were talking in yesterday's show about all of these scripted lessons that the kids were getting in school that had nothing to do with math or science or reading or literature. They get it in homeroom. This curriculum, these flyers were left over at the middle school when Planned Parenthood was invited in and allowed to talk to the students without parents ever knowing it. So these documents that this brand new science teacher passed out were from a previous science class where Planned Parenthood came into your kid's school, gave them this information. Hey, we're Planned Parenthood. You're 12 years old. You need an abortion? Don't need to tell your dad? Here, come, take our card. That's what's happening in your kids' public schools. All of these leftist special interest groups are funneling into your kids' school and at various points of the day teaching left-wing ideology to them under the guise of learning centers or lessons or racial justice planning or LGBTQ month, all that stuff now. Again, mom and dad, if you wonder why your kids can't read and write, this is what they're spending the day with. Take a look at the video.
Everything on this flyer, which, by the way, if it seems extreme, it's because it's from Planned Parenthood and it was passed out. Everything on the flyer is actually factually accurate as far as the law is concerned in Washington State, but it's alarming because the teacher looked at it and didn't have any red flags raised. Nothing internally said to this teacher, maybe this isn't something appropriate for 8th grade students. And they're saying, yeah, it was just in basically a binder in which they thought was approved material. But it just goes to the judgment of this teacher, and it goes to the judgment of the district that this was even passed out to begin with at some point.
Have you heard from any of the parents and their reaction to it?
Parents are very upset. Parents across Washington State are complaining about these kinds of instances, maybe not this kind of flyer, but different positions that teachers are taking, that they're getting so far to the left that they seem to be really, really open on topics like sexual education and this kind of stuff, where they're saying, slow down, this is maybe more for us to have a conversation with our kids, not you.
The fact that it's like Planned Parenthood has infiltrated every school across the nation and can just get away with it because mom and dad, the teachers, someone's just, they're not paying attention and not speaking up against it.
Yeah, and I don't care how liberal you are. You want to be a progressive, but even if you are a serious progressive, it should have dawned on you by now that by disallowing multiple voices, by giving kids nothing but one way of seeing the world, you are not educating them. And maybe you're one of those progressives out there that says, great, we are so correct, progressivism is the only truth, that we have a right to indoctrinate your kids. I don't believe most progressives think that way. Most progressives, if you push them, would have to acknowledge that kids should be exposed to multiple perspectives. And this is clearly not happening in these schools. And that's what the parents are saying. Hey, you have cut us out. We are their parents. You are doing this without telling us. You've given us no opportunity to opt our kids out of this if we want to. You have utterly left us behind. It goes back to what we said yesterday. If you're doing this, you are no longer public schools. Public means something. The word public, P-U-B-L-I-C, it means something. It means that it belongs to us, that all of us have a say in this. Anybody who pays taxes that goes to support the public schools, even somebody with no kids, who's never had kids, never will have kids, they're taxpayers. Their money goes to support these schools. They have a say too. But what you're doing more and more and more is taking more of our taxpayer money, more referendum money, more big union money. The Biden administration's funneling more money into these public schools, our money into these public schools, and you are shutting us out. You are castigating us. You are calling the cops on us. You are having us arrested for showing up and disagreeing with you. This is not what happens in democracies. This is what happens in fascist states. You, my friends, are becoming really quickly a fascist organization.
Well, and Planned Parenthood is basically an agent for the state. And you may have heard of Abby Johnson, who was a former director she did the whole video, and she talks about like the horrors that happen within Planned Parenthood. But we also have Monica Klein, who is a former Planned Parenthood sex ed instructor. So she has information as to exactly how Planned Parenthood works. And I just want to let everyone know she founded It Takes a Family, so check that out. But she said parents need to be concerned about Planned Parenthood being in their schools, because it's been manipulated like over and over and over about what Planned Parenthood does, and no one knows about Margaret Sanger and her atrocities. But what Monica said about Planned Parenthood in the schools is this: Planned Parenthood is uniquely skilled at getting the attention of future clients and attempting to step into parental roles, especially for young women. Parents need to be aware of these tactics and not only closely watch and vet what their kids are watching and who they are listening to, but step up and have those conversations with their kids about self-image, confidence, and intimacy. Because really, if parents don't do their jobs, Planned Parenthood is happy to take over. And that is terrifying. And
it's a very polite way of saying organizations like Planned Parenthood, and let's be very clear. You said they're an agent of the government. That's true. But Dr. Pesta, Planned Parenthood is a private company. It's a private company that receives about $500 million from the American taxpayers every single year. And most of that, by the way, is funneled right back to Democrat candidates. So the American taxpayer is paying $500 million plus, more, it's actually more than that, to Planned Parenthood nationally. That money, most of it then, goes to lobby liberal politicians and to support liberal politicians who support more and more access to abortion. Why are we paying for this? Can you imagine if the opposite was true? Can you imagine if the American public was giving $500 million a year to the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, to promote abstinence and to promote giving birth to babies and adoptions and not abortion? Can you imagine? And then the Catholic Church was to take 80% of that $500 million and give it to Republican politicians who support pro-life causes. This would be front page news on every newspaper in the country. But it's happening with liberals, through liberals, by liberals. Shh. No one wants to talk about it.
We have yet another elite New York City school and hot water with the parents. And this time it's the all-girls school, Spence School. It's in Manhattan. And there's a mom who is actually an ex-top trustee who decided she's going to pull her daughter from the school because she's sick and tired of the racial indoctrination happening. And basically the straw that broke the camel's back just happened on the last day of school, when in her daughter's class, it's the last day of school. There's not much education happening on the last day, and we know it's not happening much of all of the year. But on the last day, it got real bad when the teacher decided to show a specific show that's brand new, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to talk about the mom because it's important to this story. The mom is named Gabriela Barron. She's a Hispanic tech executive. She's a daughter of Cuban immigrants, and she's an alumna of Spence. So she's got some credentials, okay? Now
And she's not white,
she's
which
not
is the only
white.
real credential liberals want to pay attention
exactly.
to, right?
So
That's- yeah.
she fired off this, they're calling it a scorched earth letter to the prestigious school about saying that the video that was shown to her 8th grade daughter's history class on their last day of middle school history class, this is what they got to see.
In other words, they hijacked the last day of school with more propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, the video that they saw was, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, Ziwe Famudo. It's a new Showtime. It was her premiere episode. It's called Ziwe, the whole show is. And in the teaser for it, it says, Ziwe discusses the phenomenon of white women with interview guest Fran Lebowitz and hosts a focus group for real women named Karen. Musical guest, Ziwe. So the Fumoto, whatever, had a women's rights activist, Gloria Steinem, if you know her. She was also on that episode. And in that episode, she asked Steinem, how many black friends does she have? And then she decided, I'm going to read the lyrics from WAP, which is, do you know WAP? Cardi B and
B's.
Megan Thee Stallion's
Yes, yeah.
raunchy, awful song, if you can call it that. And then
It's an anthem to sodden genitalia, apparently.
There you go.
We can say that.
At one point in the show, she then, Famudo, remarked to Leibowitz, I believe that you are not concerned with how annoying white women can be. And she also said, what percentage of white women do you hate? And then, and she says, and there is a right answer. So this episode, this show sounds awful.
It's one big exercise on why it's okay to hate white women.
And then she brought in the Karens. They're all actually named Karen. She brought in 4 women named Karen. And at the end of the segment, she actually gave the women temporary tattoos that said Karen and proud. And so basically what this whole episode was teaching the girls in the the history class is to hate themselves if they're white.
Right.
And again, the mom is not white, so it's not like she's being a Karen. She's actually trying to defend, I guess.
Well, and what's the one thing I go back to the dissenting mom. Her last name is Barron, right? What is Miss Barron's? What's the one thing in her biography that has prepared her to fight this?
Hispanic.
Nope. Where'd she come from?
Oh, daughter of Cuban immigrants. I forgot about that.
She is the daughter of Cuban immigrants, which means she knows what socialist, radical left-wing tyranny is like. When you base hatred of race and class to pit people against people, to allow government to take over, to make laws that punish some people simply on the basis of who they are. The reason this Hispanic woman, and another reason she's a good girl, Mrs. Barron, a good woman, she doesn't use the term Latinx, which most Hispanics hate. She is a Cuban American woman who knows exactly what the Castros did and how the Che Guevaras of the world used this kind of racial dissension and disharmony to ultimately help them install absolute tyrannical government.
Yes, and she also said, it astounds me that a Spence faculty member felt comfortable showing this to students and thought it was acceptable to do so. Had the video derided and ridiculed Asian women, black women, or Hispanic women, the Spence community would declare with one voice that it was blatantly racist. And she said, over the last several years, my husband and I have grown increasingly concerned about certain trends at Spence, including what we believe is a de-emphasis on academic rigor. And what's interesting is, with all these stories, especially the elite schools, they're all in Manhattan, they always talk about the de-emphasis of academic rigor. Whereas in our public schools all across the nation, we're like, our kids read, write, what?
Rigor?
It's just,
rigor,
we don't,
I hardly
it's just
know
different terminology. But anyway, and so the de-emphasis on academic rigor and a single-minded focus on race, diversity, and inclusion that is now driving the school and everything that goes on within its walls. Now, let's note, again, as we always do with these elite schools in New York City, who went there? How much did it cost? $57K per year, has alums including Gwyneth Paltrow, Kerry Washington, and Michael Bloomberg's daughter, Georgina.
So again, in case you wonder, some of you may be wondering, you have vague memories of Common Core 5 and 10 years ago, and the word that I kept using was rigor, remember?
Oh, yeah,
These standards are rigorous. They're
rigorous standards.
It was like
Yeah.
every pro-leftist news site was talking about how rigorous Common Core is. Well, rigor, isn't it interesting, in the space of 5 years, rigor used to be, which was used to justify Common Core standards, now is evil. Because the more rigorous your school, the less African American kids can pass. The more rigorous your school, the harder time Latin students, non-American students have passing the curriculum. It's racist. Rigor is racist. To have a public school that emphasizes challenging schoolwork is racism. The harder the curriculum, the fewer people pass, the less minorities get ahead. So rigor has been completely thrown out of the public schools now. It's a bad name. And so all these moms and dads, including Miss Barron, who are sending these kids to these $50,000, $60,000 a year prep school high schools, should not be surprised to realize that they've completely de-emphasized academic achievement in the name of this kind of left-wing activism.
And of course, the school's response from Bodie Brizadine, the head of school, who, by the way, is retiring at the end of next year. She said, "We take this seriously. It's never acceptable to ridicule anyone at any time. This video is not part of the Spence curriculum." So really? Our teacher in the school acknowledged that sharing a satirical video that made fun of white women was a significant mistake. Oh, really? "We are sorry for any harm this has caused to anyone in our community."
And yet,
right.
Ironically, they use
Right.
critical race theory at the school, which by definition singles out people on the basis of their race. So this is the hard thing that you're dealing, moms and dads, when you deal with these schools. They'll tell you we don't do critical race theory. And what they mean by that, we don't have a single book that's titled Critical Race Theory for 6-year-olds. What they do, it's disingenuous. They don't tell you that critical race theory is a way of teaching classes regardless of what the curriculum is. And you start from certain assumptions, that all white people are a racist, all non-white people have to be victims, right? That society is endlessly systemically racist, that no possible way African American or Latina people in this country could get ahead. And if you see blacks and Hispanics who've actually made it in this country, it's not because of anything they did. It's because they were lucky somehow. It had nothing to do with hard work or studying or taking advantage of the opportunities in this country. You somehow escaped the cracks of white racism. You made something of yourself in spite of white people, not because of them.
So if you're a student, you want to get some extra credit, just obey whatever it is the teacher wishes upon you. And if you're at Barrington High School in Rhode Island, you could get extra credit for doing just that. All you had to do was testify against a bill that would ban critical race theory from the classroom. All right, so how did they find out about this whole situation? Well, Rhode Island House of Representatives Education Committee, they held a hearing on a bill related to critical race theory, so they wanted to get testimonies. Well, Parents for Defending Freedom, Defending Education, we've talked about them, PDE, they were notified that over 100 students from Barrington High School signed up to testify. But fewer than 40 of them actually answered their phones when asked to express their opinions. Well, the Parents for Defending Education were told that one student answered the phone and admitted he did not have anything to say, but he'd signed up because his teacher asked him to do so. So they did a little digging. Why would a teacher do that? And they submitted a FOIA to get information, and they uncovered in emails that 2 teachers sent emails to their kids, their students, saying, please testify. The first is social studies teacher Allison Greco, who offered 5 extra credit points on the next exam if you sign up to testify. She said, I have just learned that the bill is in committee in the Rhode Island House of Representatives. This bill essentially states that there should be no discussion of race or gender in the classroom. If you want to talk on this bill, you have only until 4 p.m. today to sign up to talk. I strongly urge you to testify on this bill tomorrow. As always, if you're a student in my class, you will receive 5 points on your next unit test if you decide to testify and provide me with your written testimony. Now, not that I want to defend her in any stretch of the imagination. She did not tell them to say be in favor of it or not. However, let's go to the English department where she didn't offer extra credit. She just wanted kids to testify. You have Jennifer Bergevine, who sent an email saying, I just heard about the bill, which is scheduled for hearing and consideration, and at the time it was tomorrow, in all caps, in front of the Rhode Island House Committee on Education. Essentially, it prohibits the teaching of divisive concepts, as well as prohibiting making any individual feel discomfort, guilty, anguish, or any distress on account of their race or sex. If this passes, I would no longer be able to teach the unit on race or gender.
Good.
As I prepare my opposition statement, I would like to be able to include student voices. Please feel free to share with me what you believe is the benefit of potentially divisive concepts such as race and gender.
Yeah, and the big lie of the story is that we're going to be banned from teaching race.
Yeah, exactly.
You've always taught race. The idea that American history never talked about race is absurd. My college kids, the only thing they know about American history is slavery. It's the only thing they've been taught.
Well, and this is the English department arguing about the race and gender
that's
stuff.
because-
The books you choose can...
Well, that's because it's critical race theory, right? It doesn't matter what books you choose. In our English department, we read books through black lenses or feminist lenses. Yep.
So
Gender
she
lenses.
doesn't have to complain. She's been doing it already.
Right.
Honestly.
And that's why it's so slippery to get a handle on critical race theory. Common Core was something you could fight. There were things you could point to. There were stipulations. They had fleshed out certain standards and certain expectations. You had something to fight. But critical race theory here, you're fighting you're not really fighting a series of books or a curriculum. You're fighting a worldview that says racist things, like all white people are guilty of racism, all minorities are victims. You're fighting this, and killing a curriculum isn't going to help you. They can bring in you could put the best books in the world in front of these kids. If these teachers want to take those books and say, ignore, we said this last week on the show, you're reading Hamlet. Oh, that's mom and dad they're refreshed, right? They're mom and dad take a sigh of relief. Oh, my kid's reading Hamlet.
Oh, yes.
Right? That means it's got to be safe. No. All your teacher has to do decide we're going to do race in Hamlet, which means we're going to ignore the plot. We're not going to read the whole play. We'll just pick a few passages out of Hamlet that make it seem like white people are bad people. We're going to put them in front of you. That's critical race theory. Getting rid of that is a vastly more difficult thing than just adjusting pedagogies. And that's the problem we find ourselves in, because for far too long, we have abandoned the public schools to educrats, and we have let them have their way. Back again for some real education. It's time for that instant classic, The Leadership of George Patton. We were talking about how critical race theory is not just for public schools. It's now being used to devastating effect in the American armed forces, where the majority of soldiers are white, and they're the ones being targeted. They're the ones told that they have to change their lives, that their very whiteness has given them privilege. They're being broken down to become different kinds of soldiers, social justice soldiers, not the kind of soldiers you're going to need should war come. It's very dangerous. And so to counter this, we want to give some statements from previous generations or leadership of the American Armed Forces. And today we started with this is George Patton Week, the controversial but everyone would tell you brilliant tank commander in World War II. Here are some quotes from Patton about leadership, about life, and about reality. Quote, "If you tell people where to go, but not how to get there, you'll be amazed at the results." That is so humane. As opposed to this critical race theory that gives you only one answer, one choice, one avenue to truth. Patton says, if you just tell people where they have to go, but not how to get there, let them use their ingenuity, let them use their gifts, their talents, their worldviews to get there, you will be stunned by how fast they make it. How about this? Quote, "Always do everything you ask of those you command." Brilliant. Don't ask people to do things that you yourself won't do. How many of these white liberals, it's almost exclusively white liberal racists who are engaging in this critical race theory. How many of these white racist teachers who are forcing racism on your kids actually resign and quit because of their racism? None. They get to keep their jobs by hating on whitey, the white teachers. If you were serious about what you're doing, you would quit. I don't have, my white privilege makes it impossibly for me to teach these kids, so I quit. Patton's right. You always, as a leader, you always do everything that you ask of those you command. So if you're telling white people to quit their jobs and give up their privilege, you better start with you. But they never do. How about this quote? "Watch what people are cynical about, and one can often discover what they lack. If you listen to people around you and let them tell you what they're cynical about, what makes them angry, that which they're unhappy with. You will be able to discover what it is they think they lack, right? All of that cynicism comes because they think they haven't been given something that somebody else may have. Interesting quote. And how about this? Quote, if we take the generally accepted definition of bravery as a quality which knows no fear, I have never seen a brave man. All men are frightened. The more intelligent they are, the more they are frightened at war. And so that's a really interesting observation, that bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move ahead in spite of fear. I mean, if our kids were learning lessons like this that are applicable to people of all races and genders, and less about why this group is evil and that group is not, I think we'd have a much better world. And one more. All very successful commanders are prima donnas and must be so treated. If you've got somebody real good at leadership, Patton says, most of us are going to be prima donnas. We're going to be spoiled children in terms of how we're treated. Yet that's the price, he says, of leadership. Now, you may not disagree with the idea, but it sure is true, isn't it? When you look at the leadership as we see it in this country down the line.
Okay, those are today's stories. If you have a question for us, please feel free to drop it in the mailbag by emailing askduke@fpeusa.org. And of course, if you enjoy our content, please support us by joining the Patriot Club. Your one-time $99 tax-deductible donation does keep this show going. Simply visit patriotclub.us to get signed up. That's patriotclub.us. And as always, as a special thank you, we will send you our signature tumbler.
And that wraps up this show. For Freedom Project, I am Dr. Duke. She is Katie. Next time, until educated, stay friends of mine. Yoda says good night.